Hello, Connect Groups. Today as I record this, we are on day 46 of the shelter-in-place order in Michigan, and I trust it will soon be over. A year ago, who would have thought it? A year ago, we were in the middle of our spring convention. Pastor Tim was prophesying that change was coming. Well, change has certainly come. It's been an intense change that none of us saw coming. Intense life situations seem to have almost like a strength of their own. They press at us, they make a demand on us, they seem to require us to do something. Something to fix the situation, do something to guarantee you won't ever have to go through this again. The truth is, in moments like these, intense situations, intense seasons of uncertainty, we have to train ourselves to learn how to simply take the next step. That's what I want to talk about today, taking the next step. Though the moment is temporary, our decisions leave a lasting impact. They affect our lives in a long-term way. So I want to ask you, what's God asking of you right now? If I focus too much on what's down the road, I'll lose my footing where I am right now. Each step is critical to our safety. It's hard to look ahead when you're navigating a moment like this. Yikes! How did that make you feel? It makes me very uneasy, very apprehensive. I'm thinking, stop, stand still, don't move, be careful. Pastors recently talked about how our brains don't like uncertainty. We can have some strange or some strong or even some wrong reactions to uncertainty. Let's say that the will of God was at the other end of that ridge. Our brain can say it's too hard, it's too scary, it's too uncertain to make the trick. We can shut down, turn back, or God forbid, just bail out, just to make that feeling stop. I can get so spooked from something that I want to take off running. When life is turned upside down, we want things to feel normal or familiar again. We want a sure footing. We want to know when this thing will be over. How do I get back to where I'm comfortable? You've probably heard people say, don't make any big decisions in moments of challenge. Well, it's because you can make decisions based on that momentary affliction just to try and gain some sense of relief. The problem is that making long-term decisions to adjust to a momentary problem is not wise. Doing so can produce a lifetime or even eternal consequences for a short-term problem. I recently had a friend ask me a challenging question, and let me preface sharing that with you with this. I love the question. It's a hard question, but I love having friends who will not only ask me the hard questions, but will ask with grace and are also willing to be transparent themselves before the Lord. The friend was simply asking out of a genuine desire to know God more. The question came also with this disclaimer. Only answer it if you feel like you're comfortable to. So the question went something like this. Is knowing the Lord in such a deeply profound way worth the loss? My loss was losing Fred, my husband, and the ensuing suffering that you faced. Would you go through it again? Would you be willing to go through it again, something like it, 10 times more, knowing that Christ is a greater surpassing gift to get out of it? Not just once, but she asked, would I be willing to go through it 10 more times? Oh, and I love the statement that she tagged on at the end. She says, I know the right answer, but I want to know your real answer. You see, she had grappled with that question herself. There's so many things I appreciate about this friend, and one of the things is just her heart for God. The love and the honesty she has in her heart before the Lord, man, I love it, love her. Wow. Now let me put this context, or this question in the context. If this had been asked of me 2.5 years earlier in the midst of that intense situation, it would have been too much. It would have been like being on that ridge. In the midst of losing Fred, it would have been too much for me to comprehend the thought of going through it again, let alone times 10. At the right time, it was a great question. It was a question that searched my heart. Would I be willing to go through it 10 more times to know Christ more? I'm so thankful for that friend, for that kind of kingdom friendship that's willing to ask the hard question. It's crazy. The more intense the situation we face, the harder it is to look down the road. It just becomes too much. When life is at its hardest, I believe there can be real wisdom in simply focusing on the next step. Maybe you're thinking, what about long-term goals? Well, I believe in holding our lives before the Lord and asking Him to fill our hearts with His plans and His purposes as we set our long-term goals. But then Scripture in Proverbs 16 also says that a man's heart plans his ways, but the Lord directs his steps. I believe that the Scriptures teach that there's a measure of safety in being directed by the Lord, both in our long-term and short-term life. We must live with this reality that only God can see the future. He can see eternity. We can only see the moment that we live in. And when that moment is intense or very hard, we just need to deal with today. As Christians, our future is in God's hands, and when we try to take too much upon ourselves for the outcome, we try to carry weight that's not ours to carry. We begin to fear and dread the unknown. Or we can try and work on our own strength to control the situation. In either case, we can live almost despising what our reality is right now. We get ourselves in trouble when we set our hearts on preconceived ideas about how something should be. And then when it doesn't go that way, our hearts can fail us in that moment. We can get a spirit of give up, a spirit of freak out. We can become angry and depressed. I'm going to tell you a story on myself about a time when I had this preconceived idea and I had a wrong response when it didn't go the way I thought. It was my very first full marathon. It was in Detroit. Now, when you run a marathon, you get focused on every little detail ahead of time. Come on, 26.2 miles, you think it through. Everything. You think through the crowds, the weather. You think about how and when you're going to refuel, where the bathrooms are, what I'm going to wear. So I'm running the Detroit Marathon, about to head into one of the prettiest parts of the course, Belle Isle. And there I had this momentary crisis due to a miscalculation based on how I thought it should be. You see, I'd never been that way before, except in theory, on paper. It was about mile 17, I was heading into a 4-mile loop on Belle Isle. Excuse me, the problem was somehow I'd gotten in my head it was a half-a-mile loop. So you guessed it, instead of choosing to enjoy the beauty of the water and the flowers, it was just beautiful there. All I could think of was, what is wrong with this picture? This is ridiculous. Somebody needs to explain this to me and explain what's wrong. It just didn't make sense to my mind. I started hating every step. For 4 miles, I basically lived between who's the idiot that planned this out and I give up, this thing is never going to end. Well, the truth was, in 40 minutes, that portion was over. 5 miles after that, one of the greatest physical accomplishments of my life, I crossed the finish line of my very first marathon. Misery morphed into victory. As I prepared this today, I believe the Lord dropped even that phrase into my heart. I believe it's a word for someone. Your misery is going to morph into victory. Don't worry how, just take the next step. So there I was, 26 miles of opportunities to quit. 26 miles. Depending on your stride, it could be about 55 to 60 some thousand steps. How do you run a marathon? One step at a time. In mile 3, you don't have a clue of what you're going to feel like at 7. You take the next step. At mile 18, when my heart was sinking, I could not wrap my brain around what joy there could be crossing the finish line 8 miles later. A 4-mile loop was almost my undoing. Marathons are intense. Life can be intense. Many of us are facing the unknown. Trusting God is so crucial in these moments. Matthew 6:34 says, "Don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself." The word worry, it means to be distracted from or disunified with. So what does worry distract us from or disunify us from? It distracts us from the Lord, from simple steps of obedience, and from just taking that next step. Psalm 37:23 says that the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. That's all the steps, not just the good steps or the easy steps, not the fun steps, but all of our steps are ordered by the Lord. God knows our future. So let me say, what step has He called me to today? That's enough. At times of uncertainty, let's keep it simple. Let His kingdom grow in us, one step at a time. Maybe it's a step of obedience that's going to produce the fruit of the Spirit. Maybe is He leading you to be more loving, to be more kind, to be patient. Maybe it's a step of surrender that'll bring a greater work of peace in your life. Maybe it's a step of obedience that will set you free. Step of faith, step of courage. What's the Lord told me to do and you to do already? He'll lead us step by step into the good plans He has for us. He'll lead us into healing and wholeness. He'll lead us into victory and into abundance. In Mark 3, Jesus commanded the man with the withered hand to first step forward. Before He told him to stretch forth his hand and healed it, He told him, step forward. In other words, Jesus gave him a command to take a step before healing would even come. The word step forward speaks of wakening something from a sleep, to rouse something from sitting or lying down, from disease and from death. The hand of God was reaching right into the middle of that place and time in that man's life. How cool is that? The Lord can reach into the middle of this moment, this pandemic, and call us to step into a place of healing. Only God can use great disease to bring forth supernatural healing in our lives. Simply by taking one step, He can prepare us to bring us into healing. Refusal to take a step that the Lord is giving you can lead you down a wrong path. Refusal can get us stuck right where we are. One step can be our setup. How we respond today will affect our week, our year, our decade. He's faithful to say, this is the way, walk ye in it. The question is, are we faithful to simply take that step? Sometimes the step God gives us even is to just stand still. Literally, a season of waiting, fasting, and praying can be our next step to enter into the destiny God has for our lives. May I say that in our day and age, I believe waiting is highly underrated. Waiting, if done correctly, will heighten our awareness of the sovereign truth that God is with us. I'm going to conclude just like I opened, just stating the reality that there's much we cannot know. We don't know what a month or a week or a year or 2 years from now is going to look like. But this we know. God is with us. He's with us in the most difficult paths. He's with us when we're in the unemployment line. He's with us in the hospital when we hear the bad doctor's report. He's with us when we're alone. He is with us. And when you look into the future for yourself, for your children, He's with us. He is here and He is there. He is with us. He'll guide our next step. We don't have to have it all figured out. We just have to take the next step of obedience to God.